I'd like to tell you all a story that I've never told on a stage like this before. When I was a kid in Texas, in the US, the last 20 minutes of the school day was like an airport. They would call buses rapid fire over the intercom, and hundreds of little people with backpacks, almost as big as they are, would shuffle out into the hallways like suitcases with legs. I wasn't built for that last 20 minutes. Sitting still felt like holding my breath. I always had a question, or some theory, or a random idea for an experiment that I really wanted to try out. And sitting there at the end of the day, not much to do, that was the moment that my teachers dreaded every day. I didn't do much wrong, but I definitely looked like someone who might. And once people file you as dangerous, untrustworthy, you can hear the folder close. The look arrives before the question. The funny thing is, if a room expects you to be in trouble, you start budgeting for trouble. You narrate yourself. You shrink a little bit. And if that doesn't work, you just lean into the part that they've already set you in. Not because you want to, but because that's what everyone expects anyway. I wasn't reckless. I was curious, goofy too. The kind of kid that adults labeled unserious, and then they were surprised when I didn't act serious around them. One year, a teacher did something ordinary that felt like a jailbreak. In the last 20 minutes of the school day, with the buses leaving and the little backpack people walking around, she chose me to help. End of the day, I got to walk the hallways, point the little ones to the right doors, and make sure that the smaller kids didn't get lost in the halls. They gave me a badge, a cheap little plastic one from the dollar store, and it felt ridiculous how much that changed the air. Same building, same cold tile floor, but the room sounded different when I was trusted in it. I straightened up without being asked. I didn't have to make myself small. I could make myself useful. I lived for the end of the school day, for the 20 minutes where I wasn't a danger, but an ally. The job wasn't glamorous. It was just mine. And in that role, the things that people had mistrusted me for, my energy, my curiosity, my excitement, it suddenly became my assets. I belonged because someone chose to see me as someone who could belong. I didn't realize it at the time, but before that, the suspicion had been a kind of gravity. I could feel it tugging on my choices. If you're already the kid who might go off, why volunteer for the fragile jobs? Why reach for responsibility? It would be much better to stay 2 steps away from anything you could be blamed for. But the moment someone placed responsibility in my hands behaved responsibly. That's really the story. 2 people, same hallway. In one, I measured my steps and I kept my voice down because I was being watched for the worst version of me. In the other, I carried a plastic badge and people expected the best version of me. I became that person. Not every time, not perfectly, but that was who I wanted to be. I've thought about that a lot as an adult, how a label can make you smaller, how a little trust can make you careful in the best way. It turns out, how we treat people quietly decides what they become in our presence. We're going to talk about policy today, but before we go there, I want you to hold this feeling with me for a minute longer. The difference between a room that assumes you're a problem to be managed and a room that assumes you're a person to be trusted. Same rules, completely different air. So what does any of this have to do with protecting you? In short, strategies shape people. Just like the strategies of suspicion and trust shape me, the protecting you strategy will shape life in Europe. What is that strategy in practice? Let me share a few plain facts from the document. First, Protect.EU wants to collect more data. The plan is to link national and EU systems so records about a person can move quickly between authorities. That means automated exchanges of fingerprints, DNA profiles, vehicle registrations, facial images, and police files across Europe. This is an explicit move to collect more and share more by design. Second, Protect.EU wants to track people's movement. Travel data would no longer be mostly about commercial airlines, but expanded to include private travel. The strategy expands collection to private boats, private flights, and widens the everyday use of roadside number plate recognition. The idea is to know where every person is at all times, no matter who you are. Third, open private data. The EU wants access to your private information. This is the big one that I'm sure you've all heard of. It's been rebranded under Protect EU, but chat control may be more familiar to some. Very simply, this pillar sets out the route to reach data that is currently private, including data protected by encryption. There's much more in the strategy, but these three moves give you the shape. Collect and connect more information, track movements and identities as a default, and create a route into your private data. Practice shows us that this philosophy is not just wrong, it's a waste of time. Imagine for a moment, what happens when a government assumes every citizen is a potential suspect? Millions of people suddenly need to be monitored. You spend billions collecting data, analyzing patterns, and keeping systems running. You drown in false positives. You chase noise, and you still miss the real threats. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens, businesses, and authorities are burdened with rules, monitoring, and endless paperwork. The system becomes a machine that consumes resources just to maintain its own suspicion. That's what Protect EU is asking of Europe. To build a security system that never stops collecting data and therefore never stops generating work. Every new data has to be secured and synchronized. Every false alert has to be investigated. Every single just-in-case record has to be stored forever, on the off chance that it might matter someday. As it turns out, control is a tax on everyone, every day, and it does not scale. But inefficiency is just one way that control as a philosophy fails. The mechanisms of control also open up a route straight to insecurity. As I'm sure every security engineer here knows, every time you collect another pile of information, you create another target. The bigger the database, the bigger the payout for the hackers, and the worse the aftermath for the victims. Protect EU imagines safety in centralization. One place where fingerprints, DNA, travel logs, and your private messages all come together. But from a security perspective, it's the holy grail of data breaches waiting to happen. The more systems you connect, the more wires there are to cut. And suddenly, instead of defending your own data, you're defending the huge amount of new technologies designed to collect that data. Don't forget, the access given to the government can be turned into access for criminals. And if the recent breach of the Dutch police system has shown us anything, it's that criminals always find a way in. With the far-reaching collection of data that Protect EU sets out as a strategy, we can be sure that the government databases of the EU will be under attack like never before. One breach, one insider, and the very system built to protect us becomes the instrument of our own downfall. But I can already hear the thoughts of the engineers in the room. Of course we can design a system to be secure. Of course we can improve the false positives. Of course we can make control into an efficient strategy. We can debate endlessly about the technical difficulty of a solution, and while I respectfully disagree, we would both be missing the point. Because even if you could make it work, even if you could make it efficient, the very philosophy behind it runs directly against our European values. The European Union was not born from a blueprint of control. We created this union because we came from the ashes of a century where control, instead of trust, had ravaged the continent. We know where that path leads. So when we stand for dignity, we don't mean it as an abstract principle, we mean it as a promise that no one should have to doubt their value as a human. But dignity begins with how you're seen. Do you walk into a room as a citizen, as a human, or do you walk in as a potential threat? Control as a philosophy must assume you are a threat. If you aren't someone who belongs in an environment, you're someone who should be managed. Our foundation of human rights rests on the principle that citizens are not enemies. This foundation isn't a privilege given to us, but it's a foundation of what it means to be an EU citizen. We Europeans carry history in our bones. We know what control looks like because we've lived under it, generation after generation. The Roman Empire promised peace through control, Pax Romana, but it was peace at the edge of the sword, where citizenship meant submission. Skip ahead 2 millennia, my own country, the Netherlands, knows this all too well. In 1940, we had the most comprehensive civil registry in Europe. Names, addresses, religions, all carefully documented. We were so proud of our administrative efficiency. The Nazis conquered us in 5 days. And within weeks, they had used our own records to identify every Jewish citizen in the country. By 1945, the Netherlands had lost 75% of its Jewish population, which was the highest percentage in Western Europe. Not because we were more anti-Semitic, but because we were more organized. Our control systems worked exactly as we designed, just not for who we designed them for. This is not ancient history. There are people in this room whose parents remember the knock on the door, the lists, the efficiency of the controlled state. And yet, here we are, building the same infrastructure, just digital. Have we learned nothing? But what about today? Surely technology has advanced enough that control can be successful. We don't have to look any further than China. China offers us a living example of control as a philosophy. Mass surveillance, social reputation scores, digital authoritarianism perfected. And what has it produced? Walk through Shenzhen and you'll see compliance, not creativity. Citizens know they're watched and perform their citizenship rather than living it. Innovation? They copy our technologies because surveillance states don't innovate. Quality? Every manufacturer here knows that IP theft is almost guaranteed in China. Their own citizens don't even trust their baby formula, their vaccines, or their own buildings to stay standing. That's what control produces. A society where nothing is real because nothing is trusted to be real. If you're assumed to be a liar anyway, what are you gaining by telling the truth? Here's the absurdity. Protect EU wants us to compete with China on their own control. They have decades of experience crushing political criticism, managing surveillance, controlling narratives. They have 1 billion people trained from birth to accept the watching eyes. We have citizens who topple governments over pension reforms. We've been talking about Europe, about values, about what control means here. Let's zoom out for a moment and look east. China's often held up as the model of complete control made into reality. They've built a society where surveillance and suspicion aren't the exception, but the air that people breathe. I'm going to read some clauses, and as I read each one, I want you to raise your hand if you think it's a net positive for citizens. Just your gut response. Does this make people's lives better or not? So first, the government uses a permanent biometric search grid for fingerprints, DNA, face images, vehicle files, and police records that are auto-matched across regions by default. All right, I see no one's raising their hand. No. Government-mandated access to end-to-end encrypted communications. Nothing. Telecoms and platforms store your data for longer so investigators can retrieve it when they need. Show of hands? Don't be shy.
That's the question. Do we need to judge this in the light of China? Because I feel like some of these statements is where other, what we consider more Western nation states might be heading.
It's great. It's very sharp. We'll get onto that. But just for now, I would say have a look at the clauses and just flat out, do you think they would fit here? On-platform and on-device large language models scan all contents continually to document a potential crime. Passenger systems score travelers automatically, combining watch lists with full travel histories. Facial recognition systems scan crowds and match faces against those in shared galleries, documenting movement and behavior. No one wants to raise their hand? No. Thank you. Now here's the twist. None of those were Chinese policies. Every single one is written into the new Protect EU plan. This is the reality. What we dismiss as authoritarianism when it wears another country's flag, we're quietly normalizing when it's stamped with our own. The label changes, the language softens, but the substance and the result is the exact same. And the question for us is simple. Do we want to live in a Europe that adopts the very playbook that we claim to oppose? We spoke about the philosophy of control from the perspective of technology. It's secure and inefficient. We've seen that control is not in the foundation of the Netherlands or in the EU. We've learned that control cannot work at scale, nor as the groundwork for a culture. However, we're ignoring the last nail in the coffin for control as a policy. Humanity is driven by trust. Every human exchange begins with trust, whether we notice it or not. We don't only think about it since trust is so natural, but when you buy coffee, for example, you trust that the barista won't poison you. You trust that when you greet a stranger on the street, they won't attack you. Even silence between two people demonstrates trust, so the other will let you be. We don't think of it as trust because it's so natural, so woven into the fabric of life. Trust is our baseline. Think for a moment how many times a day you rely on trust without really knowing it. You tap your card at the supermarket and you trust that the numbers moving through the invisible networks will land in the right bank account. You board a train and you trust that the driver, who you've never met, has stayed awake for you. You trust that every person you talk to has a reason to be and a heart behind their actions. None of us run around second-guessing every person in sight. But imagine if we did. If we founded our philosophy on the idea that anyone could be a threat at any time. Every cup of coffee you order would have to be watched and tested. Every stranger needs to be kept at a distance. No more casual chats with random people on the street. Everything around you becomes a danger to be controlled. We are not built for this. Humans are worthless at suspicion. Our brains literally cannot maintain that level of vigilance without breaking down. Ask any soldier, any abuse survivor about what constant fear does to your body. Stress hormones, the exhaustion. Your world shrinks until nothing feels safe anymore. Evolution didn't design us to see threats everywhere because the tribes that did died out, not from predators, but from themselves. From the poison of never being able to let your guard down, to rest, to think. The societies that survived were ones that mastered something infinitely more complex than control. They mastered trust. They learned to create systems where betrayal was costly, not because of punishment, but because of their own shame. And now Protect.eu asks us to unlearn thousands of years of progress, to wake up each morning not with curiosity about the day ahead, but with paperwork of where we were yesterday. To meet strangers not with the possibility of connection, but with the certainty of betrayal. To raise children who know that their every movement is mapped and tracked, their every word potentially flagged, and their every friendship stored in a government database. What happens to a child who grows up knowing that they're always watched? I can tell you, I was that kid in the classroom. People become performers of innocence rather than genuinely innocent. They learn to hide, not because they have something to hide, but because hiding becomes the only private space they have left. They don't experiment, they don't question, they don't push boundaries. They've learned that fear and suspicion is the foundation of society. Is that the Europe we want to build? No. We are better than this. We don't have to build Europe in the image of control, like so many other countries are doing around us. Look at what we've built when we chose trust over control. The Schengen area, 27 countries where you can drive from Lisbon to Tallinn without showing a paper, without a guard checking your intentions. Do you recognize how insane that sounds to the rest of the world? We dissolved borders. We bet 450 million people's security on the radical idea that open movement creates more safety than walls. And we were right. Look at GDPR. Everyone told us we were crazy. You'll kill innovation, they said. Tech companies will flee Europe. Instead, we created the global gold standard for privacy. Companies worldwide now advertise GDPR as a mark of quality. We didn't control the data. Instead, we gave the control back to the citizens. And the world followed our lead, not because we forced them, but because we proved that trust is an advantage. When the Netherlands pioneered same-sex marriage in 2001, the world said that we were destroying society. 23 years later, it's illegal in 36 countries. When we decriminalized drugs and treated addiction as a health issue and not as a criminal one, the world said that we would become a narcotic wasteland. Instead, we have the lowest drug mortality rate in Europe. We built a society where CEOs bike to work alongside students, where the Prime Minister takes public transport, where trust is so embedded that we leave our bikes outside and our children play unsupervised. With trust, we built one of the happiest, most innovative, most prosperous societies on Earth. We're better than control, and we've already proven it. But being better isn't enough anymore. Protect.eu is already moving through committees. and the infrastructure of control is being quietly built while we sleep. Better means nothing if we don't act like it. So here's what we do now. Not tomorrow, not after another committee hearing, not after we've studied the issue, but now, today, in this room. I'm going to give you a battle plan. I don't like the language of war, but that is what this is. A battle for the soul of Europe. This is about fighting for who we've always been. The Europe that chose dignity over suspicion. The Europe that dissolved borders instead of building walls. The Europe that trusted first. Legislators, executives, and engineers. This is how we defend what Europe stands for. To the legislators, you swore an oath to uphold the constitutional values of Europe and to defend human dignity, freedom, and the rule of law. You defend the oath that builds our culture of trust. You are the only people in this room who can stop protecting you before it becomes law. You hold the pen. You cast the vote. And that means you have the power to ensure that Europe remains a place of trust, not control. You may not know it, but your position is already incredibly powerful in the fight for a trusting EU. You don't have to invent any new frameworks. Everything you need is actually already here. GDPR is already law. The European Convention on Human Rights is already ratified. Privacy by design is already gaining speed. You don't have to build an entirely new foundation. We only have to stand on what we've already built. Think about that for a moment. You have decades of legal infrastructure specifically designed to protect citizens from exactly what Protect EU is proposing. Now is the time to use those tools that we prepared for this scenario. This is what you as a legislator can do. GDPR is our shield against control and our way forward to trust. It already requires data minimization, purpose limitation, and privacy by design. Protect EU's mass data collection violates all three. You don't need new legislation to fight. You just need to enforce what's already law. GDPR gives you the power to demand a reason behind every lawful infringement of privacy. Every time the strategy of control supposedly needs more data, make them prove it. Make them justify every fingerprint, every data sample, every travel log. Make them fail to prove that control is more efficient than trust. GDPR is not just the gold standard of privacy, but a statement that citizens own their data, not governments. Legislators, that is a powerful statement that you can use against control. Article 8 of our own European Convention on Human Rights promises that everyone has the right to respect for their private and family life, their home, and their communications. We don't think about it, but these are fighting words, as we say in Texas. The European Court of Human Rights has struck down mass surveillance before, and they'll do it again if you give them the chance. But they have to be given the challenge. Every time the Protect EU strategy proposes blanket data collection, you can invoke Article 8. Every time encryption is threatened, you invoke Article 8. The European Court of Human Rights is the guardian of a promise that we made after we saw what happens when governments know everything about everyone. Use that promise. It was written for exactly this moment. And if they insist, dig their heels in, and implement controls policy anyway, force them to justify it on a schedule. Every surveillance measure should expire unless explicitly renewed. Every database needs to justify its existence every single year. Sunset clauses force the uncomfortable question every time. Do we really want this? This is the question we want people to be asking themselves when a strategy of control is renewed. We can force legislators to look back on the effects of control and see that they didn't want to go down that road again. Beyond these, you have the most powerful tool of all, your voice for the people of Europe. When Protect EU and inevitably other policies with control at heart come up, don't just vote, but speak. Tell them about the Europe you want your children to inherit. Tell them about the Europe that we have stood for centuries. Every bit of authoritarianism in history began when reasonable people stayed quiet while unreasonable things happened. Don't be reasonable. Stand up and speak out. Legislators, you have the power to stop this. But you're not alone in this room, and you're also not alone in this fight. To the executives, CEOs, CTOs, business leaders, I see you calculating. Is trust and privacy really a competitive advantage? Is trust worth the investment over control? Yes. And I'm not asking you to take this on faith. Look at your own marketing materials. How many of you already advertise GDPR compliant like a badge of honor? 5 years ago, GDPR was going to kill your business, remember? And now you wear it like armor. Your American competitors scramble to match. Your Chinese counterparts can't even imagine. This is your heart. Intellectual property can be reinvented, money can be raised, but privacy and trust as a constitutional right is unique. You operate in the only market on earth where privacy is a constitutional right, and customers actually believe you'll respect it. As a European company, trust is your product. Every transparency report you publish is a sales document. Every public audit is marketing material. Every privacy feature is an advantage your competitors outside Europe literally cannot match. They operate in jurisdictions where secret court orders force them to lie to their customers. You don't. Think about what you can offer that Silicon Valley can't. We couldn't spy on you even if we wanted to. That's not a limitation. Zero-knowledge architecture isn't just security, it's a model for your business. When you can prove mathematically that you cannot access customer data, you're not just protecting them from you, you're protecting them from any government that might pressure you. Proton Mail does this, Signal does this, Tutanota does this. And each of them has millions of users who chose them specifically because they're not American, not Chinese, but European. Built on European values and protected by European law. Right now, there's a company in Silicon Valley whose entire compliance department is trying to figure out how to serve European customers without getting sued. There's a company in Beijing that's completely locked out of the European market because they legally have to surveil every one of their customers. You're already here. You're already compliant. You're already trusted. This is your market to lose. Every choice for privacy by design is an advantage that your competitors couldn't copy even if they wanted to. Every scathing transparency report is a piece of marketing materials that your competitors are legally not allowed to disclose. Your competitors build backdoors into technology as a part of their service. That's not hard to compete with. Your customers are already facing a difficult choice. They already feel the pressure. They know that they're being analyzed by every product they buy. You can be the company that lets people breathe. You can be a market leader with your commitment to privacy. You can show the world that European companies don't succeed despite our privacy laws, but we succeed because of them. And I haven't forgot about the engineers in the room. You are the foundation for every technology, every line of code, and every surveillance tool. You're also the only people who actually understand what Protect EU is asking for. The legislators hear lawful access to encryption, and they think it sounds reasonable. The executives just worry about compliance. But you know what it actually means. Mathematically impossible problems dressed up as solutions. Cryptographic backdoors, deep inspection, key escrow. These aren't features, they're failures by design. You cannot build a door that only opens for the good guys. You cannot create encryption that decrypts only for the righteous. This has nothing to do with skill. It's just not possible. You, as engineers, are the only ones with the actual power to build it better. You have more power than you think. Every surveillance state in history needed engineers, but you can demand better. Every surveillance system requires your hands on the keyboard. Every backdoor requires your signature on the commit. Every privacy violation requires you to write the code. And you can say no. You can build systems where privacy is not an added feature, but a foundation that you made inexorable. End-to-end encryption by default, zero-knowledge architecture, privacy by design. These are systems so fundamentally built on trust that adding a backdoor later would require tearing down the entire project. This is the game we're playing now. Protect EU wants to mandate backdoors? Let them. You build systems so thoroughly encrypted, so deeply distributed, so fundamentally private, that implementing their mandate would cost more than the entire security budget and break everything else in the process. You have the power to make privacy the path of least resistance. You can make surveillance an engineering nightmare. And you're not alone. Look around this room. You're not the only engineer being asked to build something that breaks your heart. You're not the only one who knows that these systems will fail. You're not alone in believing that technology should protect people. We're just quiet about it. But it only takes a spark. One engineer at Signal designed a protocol so fundamentally private that metadata doesn't exist to collect. And now it's the gold standard the legislators have to work around. One engineer hardened Firefox against fingerprinting so effectively that ad tech companies lost billions. These people weren't revolutionaries. They were engineers who decided that trust, not control, was the foundation of their art. Hundreds of millions of people are safer now because of their individual spark. You can be that person. So here's my question for every engineer in the room. What kind of technology do you want to build? So here's what I know to be true. Legislators, you have the law on your side. Executives, you have the market on your side. Separately, engineers, you have technology on your side. Separately, each of you is powerful, but together, you're unstoppable. Control as a strategy doesn't understand that we've already won this fight. We won in 1995 when the EU pioneered data protection laws. We won in 2016 when we made GDPR the global standard. We won every time we chose trust over control. We built the Schengen area. We built GDPR. We built the foundation of trust in Europe because we understood what happens when you look towards control instead. Think about what you're going home to tonight. Legislators, you're going home to citizens who trust you to defend their rights. Executives, you're going home to customers who trust you with their time. Engineers, you're going home to users who trust your code with their lives. Legislators, executives, engineers, you're not three separate groups. You're three parts of the same philosophy, that trust is the most powerful strength we have. I told you at the beginning about my cheap little plastic badge, how being trusted changed who I was in that hallway. The same kid, same building, became something completely different just because someone chose to see the best in me instead of suspecting the worst. We have that same choice right now. We can build a Europe that watches its citizens like suspects, or we can build a Europe that trusts its citizens like people. You know what to do. Show them what Europe is made of. Thank you. All right, so this is a discussion. If anyone has any points that they would like to mention, any questions? Yes, please.
Not so much, okay, it's a question. So, I have the privilege, problem of being neither, let's see, a legislator, nor an executive, nor an engineer. So, I feel partly an investor. And I'm wondering, as none of these glorious people, there's one point that I missed in this whole list. Like, I was expecting you to end on, call your representative today, email them like within the next 5 minutes, and like bombard the fuck out of them.
Nice.
What's that?
So, well, I didn't want to push it very much, but our company is doing an initiative, but this is unbranded. I'll tell you about that in a moment. When we're standing outside, I will give you all the QR code. But no, this is meant to be unbranded. So I would love to give you some suggestions about, call your representative and stand up and stand behind our initiative, but I didn't want to plug our initiative here. And so for you also, you not being an engineer or a legislator or an executive, I mean, I'm not exactly sure what you do for your job, but you have power. You have power to be able to make a change. And those are three categories that you can make a change. If you have business power, if you have power in the government, or if you have power in your technologies, but you have power individually. And the strategies that we discussed here, you can use all the same. That's really great. We can, yeah.
Yeah. Where does the need come from? Which agenda is driving the measures that you were
Protect you. So this is very difficult because the actual legislation of Protect EU is carefully protected. Nobody knows really who wrote it. They protected who actually wrote the document. So privacy for them, but not for us. But the reason that they're actually doing it is very nebulous. But the reason I wrote this based on trust and not control is because I believe that the European Union now is seeing China, seeing the United States, which also recently signed a whole lot of data analysis laws. And they're seeing this happen in the world and they are panicking. You know, it's exactly what I was talking about. They doubt the history that we come from, the values that we built. And so
also the practical side, right? I mean, if you look at last week Saturday, there's a whole bunch of groups doing stuff that we didn't like to mount, right? You could say that the friend of the Netherlands came together for the first time in life.
Yeah.
Okay, the cops want to get protection. They want to see those radical groups. They want to know what's behind the deck.
Yeah.
They feel like they need to decrypt that encryption that's out there. So
Yes.
it comes from a cause that is quite just in order to protect the city from hate.
Absolutely.
So there's also these measures that, I love your story, by the way. Really,
Thank you.
really good. It really makes me think. And I'm also trying to see the other angle as well. You know,
Yes, sir.
that there's also the force of nature, if you will, to prevent these things, to prevent terrorism. And so I'm not sure where it's coming from. And I don't know. Huh? Yeah.
I'm very happy you mentioned it.
Yeah, but it's an open question. I'm not sure.
No, I'm very happy you mentioned it because you're right. Don't get me wrong. I support law enforcement. I support our laws-based society. I don't want everyone to just be able to do whatever they want all the time, no police. That's not what I stand for. But when we choose to solve a problem, right? People organizing for a protest, for example, we can choose how we approach that problem. And I'm not an expert. I'm not a legislator. But I can say that we looked at it from, okay, break encryption. They communicate each other, break encryption, like that. But there are 100 different ways that we go about that problem right now. For example, we have cameras on the streets that record public areas. But like, it's a very difficult question to talk about exactly for that issue. But it's the way we approach the problem is already false. We could have taken the time to look how we can do this in a manner that respects the legacy of Europe. But instead, we jump straight to a technical solution that kills our legacy. So not that I have an answer for you exactly. But what I can say is that, these solutions can be applied sometimes. Of course, you need to have some visibility. You need to have some threat intel. Absolutely. But I don't think that we need to massively, apply this idea. It's Europe espouses trust before control. Of course, the government has to do work. It needs to function. But we cannot evaluate trust after control. Control first. And that's what I would think the current mindset is, why we're here. Yes, Simon.
Just a comment to this, I think it's often portrayed too much as
Oh, yeah, actually, that's a good point. Thank you, Simon.
I agree with what was said here, and indeed, if you read the newspapers, it's mostly about crime, right? So, as you mentioned, terrorism, pedophilia, etc. I think it's too much portrayed like a zero-sum game. As you rightfully point out, there are many ways to reach a certain goal, and seems obvious to choose this one, but there are potentially other paths, and there is a cost to it, as you rightfully point out, and that's a debate that still needs to be had, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and quickly.
You put it well.
It's too late.
It's a choice. Yes, other people.
Thank you for a very powerful presentation, in which you also got me thinking.
Cheers.
I haven't really delved into Protect EU too much, not today, but I definitely will. But I'm also curious because I just call them baby. They also know that there is some resistance, that people don't agree, and also that we have certain legislation like the GDPR you mentioned,
Yep.
and also the new AI Act also has some safeguards which go against what Protect EU is proposing.
Yes.
But how do they see that discussion, or how do they feel that Protect EU goes against existing legislation? How do they justify that?
So currently, they're trying to find one-off excuses. But what they really do, they understand that the foundation, GDPR, what we've written, is kind of hampering them. So this is very much nebulous, but their strategy with regards to the existing legislation right now is make holes in it, and inevitably, you kind of just push it away. If you write another bill that infringes on the rights, and another one, who cares? No one's going to look at the bill that espouses your rights anyway, because it's already being violated. It's like in the United States right now. And there's many things going on that are arguably dubious, but there's so many things being pushed through that it doesn't matter. Psychologically, it's called the chilling effect, where you keep doing the same thing and eventually it gets through. In fact, the Protect EU strategy is itself being used for the chilling effect. This is actually the 9th time that they voted on this proposal. Every single year, they change it a little bit, but not really, and then they put it back up again. And people are getting tired of saying no, and at one point it'll go through. And that's exactly how I expect them to counteract the other legislation, with the chilling effect. Cheers. Anyone else?
Something I missed, or not missed, but I would like to add, is the EU mostly stems from, I believe, from protests and protest growing. But when they look at protests as a problem that needs to be solved, yet protesting is a human rights in the EU, and the reason for that is it's not a problem, it's a symptom of an underlying disease.
Absolutely.
Which needs to be solved. And cracking down with mass surveillance doesn't work. If you look at recent history, the Soviet Union, and before in the Soviet Union they had mass surveillance. Hungary, massive protests, didn't work. Poland, the fall of the Berlin Wall, they had a Stasi, the most sophisticated surveillance system at the time. And they still fail to see the problem. That's something I would like
I'm very happy you mentioned it. This is exactly what I'm talking about. It's not about whether or not we can eradicate protests specifically. It's citizens are viewed as a problem. You're an animal to be put in a cage because you're going to do something crazy. You could break the law, so we're going to watch you. That means that protests are now looked down upon. Speaking your voice is looked down upon. Having an opinion. If you're an animal, if you're something to be controlled, kind of all these rights you have fall away because you're just a peon, so to speak. So I'm very happy you mentioned that because what Protect EU kind of, what it makes a problem of right now with data collection and all these other things, this becomes a problem down the line. It's a philosophy, right? It's not just that I don't, of course I don't want my data encryption being broken, but it's not an engineering question, it's a philosophy. It's the philosophy of control, where people need to be controlled. They're scary and the world is a scary place, so we need to control it. We can get into it, I can talk about this for hours, but this is the way you walk around in your life. Do you walk around in your life, as I said, do you make sure that your coffee is poisoned in the morning? Who does that? It's about the way you look in the world around you, and the right to speak your mind, the things we take for granted in Europe, those are a big component. But yeah, also I would like to add, I'm going to be standing outside with the QR code for our company initiative, in case you're all interested. And we will also, if you would like, we can talk a bit more about the actual bill. Because I gave some quick bits, and I can assume that you may be skeptical about what the bill actually contains, but I would recommend to read it for yourself and have a discussion with me about it. But I'll be outside standing if you guys would like to have a talk. There's one more.
I'd just quickly like to add for the initiative, it's a really difficult initiative to tackle. There's no European way to do this. It's got to be per country. We're doing an initiative, but I'm afraid most of you are not allowed to sign it because it's going to be a Dutch edition of it. If you remember the little eyes you saw with stars around it and hashtag Stop Protect EU, you're going to see it. And then most likely if you reside somewhere in Europe, you're going to see it and we'll give you instructions on how to defend it in your own country. So don't you worry.
Yeah, you guys will be seeing a lot more of me, hopefully.
Main stage next year.
Okay, that's yes, please.
Yeah. One final question and remark. In the Netherlands, we're so lucky that in a couple of weeks we can go to the voting booth once again and hopefully vote for a new government. Are you in contact with parties who are voting for or running for election?
Who's pro and who's con?
Yeah.
Yeah, so actually, thank you. That's our Dutch initiative, actually. Thank you for asking that. Our Dutch initiative is not about kill Protect EU on a European scale. Our initiative actually get the Netherlands to finally unify its opinion. We're so fragmented right now. It's exactly as you said. Some parties are very much against it. Some are very much for it. Every time the EU votes, we kind of abstain. Sometimes we vote against, not really. So we need to harden our European stance against it and be very vocal. Because the Netherlands kind of like is one of the strongest human rights-based countries in the Netherlands, or in Europe. So if we fail, it most impacts our constitution. And we're very quiet about it, very silent. So that's kind of what we're doing with our company initiative, is to try to get the political parties of the Netherlands to do something together. So
who's pro and who's con then?
Ooh, off the top of my head, who do we have? VVD, we had who was con. Mostly the right parties are usually against it because they understand data security. So to speak, nothing of politics for that matter. But right now, the right-leaning parties, on average, are the ones who decline it. But yeah, that.
The last year, the coalition of the Netherlands was partially against.
Yeah, partially against. It's in our constitution. Like, yes.
Like, so all the right-wing parties are against also?
Not all, not all. It's super fragmented, and some parties have intentionally not taken a line. Some right parties as well, left, doesn't quite matter. Some parties intentionally don't say anything. They kind of remain quiet, and that's the problem in the Netherlands right now. There's no real parties are saying something. Some are like, yeah, okay. There's no real push. So, I mean, I can say that some right parties are left or whatever, but no one is really standing up. No one is saying yes, no one is saying no. They're just kind of hanging out. Yes, please, in the back.
So the thing you mentioned is, I think that you mentioned earlier, is probably the biggest thing, and that is that this motion will not die, right?
No.
So they bring it back time and time again.
Yes, sir.
So we'll probably defeat it again, right? But in the end, the risk is that it will go through.
It will.
What is the more sustainable thing, the more sustainable thing that we could do to make sure that it, in the end, it really dies and stays dead?
Yes, sir. So I'm nice. I very much support that idea. But right now, so you'll notice the first half of my speech was about how it's bad and about how it says there's these problems. But the solution is to lean into what we already are. We've built the Europe for decades now. We've invested into something we knew then was right, and now we start to doubt it. It's not that we have to replace Protect EU with something in the same vein. We just have to look at our legacy we already have. We already have GDPR. We already have the European Court of Human Rights. These are things not replicated in other federations.
Right. So I think the problem is that we're one terrorist attack away from this getting approved.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't see any way of permanently defeating this kind of motion. We've seen this in the US. I think that is the risk that we're running in Europe also.
Well, at the risk of going a bit too far outside of my wheelhouse, I would say that this question, trust or control, has been a question for humanity forever. Do you walk around on the street feeling comfortable with yourself? Are you self-confident? Do you trust in yourself? Or are you not very confident and you shoot yourself in the foot because of it? That's a very personal application, but it's the same philosophy. Do you trust or do you control? I can speak for days, but every major religion speaks about faith. It's the same idea. You become a very different person when you're focused on control, when you're focused on suspicion. That's not the way people are meant to be. So I would say we need to realize that. And frankly, I don't know if that will ever go away. I don't think people, it's natural to be afraid. We're human, we're mortal. It's very natural. But I would wager to say that the way we're going right now, with the world being a bit more progressive, and if we just keep pushing this, if Europe stays strong, we will be a market leader, because that is in the end what people want. If it's not the most efficient solution will come out. It's just about, how fast do we want to do that? So this is undeniably the most efficient solution, and it will come around. Just, I'd rather not live under 200 years of authoritarianism first.
I hope you're right.
Yeah, me too. I think we had one more question as well in the back. Nope? Okay. All right. Anybody else would like to add anything? I really enjoyed your questions, by the way. Thank you for making me think.